Right, one of the very annoying things is the discussion in the media with Bitcoin. You generally will find two very extreme views of Bitcoin in the media. One of them is Bitcoin is the worst thing ever. Look at all the suckers who bought it at, what was it, $1,000. And the other extreme is it's the greatest thing ever and it's going to go to $100,000 or something like that. I mean, I think I've seen predictions that Bitcoin is going to eventually be worth $1 million or something. It's hilarious. Both of these views are crazy. And so I'll illustrate kind of with a simple example using peanut butter at first, and then we'll get into Bitcoin and the business cycle. Okay, and what I mean by that is discussing the context of the general rise and fall. By the way, even economists like Paul Krugman aren't even that smart when it comes to Bitcoin. They talk about a deflationary currency as if they know what that means, and they have no idea that no, Bitcoin's not a deflationary currency at all, and you'll see in a second. Okay, imagine that there was a huge demand all of a sudden for peanut butter for whatever reason. I don't know, there was some article in some paper that was like, peanut butter is so amazing, it's so healthy for you, it'll cure all your cancer, blah blah blah. Actually, it's very similar to what happened or what's happening with quinoa. Right now there's a quinoa bubble. Quinoa used to be $19 for a 25-pound bag. Now it's like $150. It'll probably eventually be $300. It's in a bubble, right? I mean, they're throwing any kind of money after it because to them it's worth it. There's usually an over-enthusiasm in a market, basically, is what's happening. And so what ends up happening, continuing that, is these producers, entrepreneurs, right? And this is the beginning of the mistake. They hear from these other entrepreneurs that this entrepreneur is making $100,000 a month selling peanut butter. Nice. So they hit the market with newer forms of peanut butter, and people begin to demand those too. Okay. Now, there's something to note here about people in general, right? Just right now, you're going to hear all these people talk about how the S&P 500 is just the greatest investment in the world, and oh my gosh, it always returns, and blah, 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 blah. The people who 10 years ago were telling me that the S&P 500 was the greatest investment ever were the ones that swore up and down in 2009, you never do that again. It's the worst investment in the world, right? Just like the same people who followed Jesus later wanted him crucified. The children of Israel loved manna until they didn't. It was free food. And they also loved the free quail until they didn't. I mean, it's basic human nature. People change. I mean, if you want to see this, there's tons of examples in history of people, 1 second this, next second this. So what happens? People get tired of peanut butter. They just do, right? But remember, there were all kinds of entrepreneurs that were producing more and more of it and starting new kinds, and all of a sudden, demand collapses. They're getting tired. And by the way, I realize that, consider this too. If more and more entrepreneurs are producing peanut butter, that creates a problem in general in the economy anyway, in that we got a problem because who's building our houses and who's repairing our cars and who's producing our oil and our water, etc., right? So yes, there are all kinds of economic problems when there's too much enthusiasm for something, and we'll see why Bitcoin is no different in a second, okay? My point here is be very skeptical in extreme enthusiasm, right? Because it's seldom based on reality. It's usually based on emotion. Anytime someone is very emotional, you should be very skeptical about them, okay? What is it Sun Tzu says? Do not use arms because of your own emotions, right? Shouldn't really be going around doing anything because you're emotional. And again, people loved Jesus. Then they wanted him crucified. Wow, pick one, people, right? It's human nature. So the problem, there's another economic problem going on with this whole peanut butter thing, and I illustrate this. This is from a different slide here, but if everybody owned gold on the same block, right? If he owns gold, and 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 he owns gold, what are you going to trade with? Well, what are you going to trade? Well, you're going to trade with gold, but what are you going to trade? You all own gold. By the way, this is my favorite thing about America right now is everybody's all worried about hyperinflation. Basically, everybody owns gold and silver. So what are you going to trade with other people? Who owns the food? Well, unless you live in Utah, they actually have like year's supply of food, right? So if everybody's producing peanut butter and wanting peanut butter and demanding peanut butter, what's the value of peanut butter? Not very much, right? It's kind of a problem, all right? So let's go back to Bitcoin. Bitcoin, fundamentally, all it is a payment system, okay? It's not regulated, it's not controlled, it's a payment system. When people talk about it as a currency, I just don't buy that. Okay. Okay, fine. Okay, maybe we can call it a currency. It's really a payment system, but whatever. You want to call it a currency, fine. Call it a currency. We'll use your term. Okay, let's just pretend that that's your term. Okay. So right now, Bitcoin is really finding its price. What I mean by that is I suspect that if Bitcoin goes on for the next 25 years, it's a huge if, but if it goes on for the next 25 years, that you will, by looking at a chart or a graph or whatnot, you would be able to see where the price really should be. And I suspect it's going to be lower than what most people think. I can't prove that, but I suspect, okay? However, Bitcoin, you hear these people like, it's an independent market, it's not controlled by anything. That's true, but it's not completely free of all markets. What I mean by that is, there is a price of Bitcoin that is too much relative to other goods, right? If Bitcoin goes to $100,000, have you thought about the problem with that, right? If it goes to $100,000, that would mean that oil is a better buy. You would sell all of your Bitcoins and buy oil instead, right? Because there's going to be even less oil at that price than there would be Bitcoin. I mean, like, you have to think about these things, right? Nothing can go up in price relative to something else in too much of a disproportionate manner, right? And gold could go up to, let's say, $1 million an ounce. But if that happens, silver is not going to be staying at $12 an ounce. It's just not, or $15 an ounce, right? So you have to think about the proportion. Something can't go up too high relative to something else. You always want to be thinking about that. And that's what I mean by be careful about extreme enthusiasm, whether that's negative or positive, right? People talking about Bitcoin's completely worthless, you might consider that negative enthusiasm. They want to hate on it to hate on it. No value in that either. Likewise, there's no value in someone claiming it's going to go to the moon, okay? But here's the point. Enthusiastic cycles will always happen with humanity. It's part of the business cycle, right? The business cycle really usually is a over-enthusiasm, and that's the bust part. It's a self-correcting, right? People look back and they say, oh, that was stupid. It really was, right? Those are the bubbles and they must be pops, and we usually experience a decline. Otherwise, civilization doesn't progress, right? When we try to prevent the bubble from bursting, okay, no comment there. We all know what's not being said that's being said. That's when your bigger problems, because the bubble just gets even bigger, right? At least if it self-corrected in the cycle, it would do less damage. And these bubbles in these enthusiastic cycles that do burst, like you could say Bitcoin going to 1,000 and then falling back down to, what was it, 200, I think. They do teach us all a healthy lesson about skepticism. And I have to give credit to Warren Buffett. He says it better than I could, and I like the way he said it. There is no new sex. It's kind of like someone coming and promising you, there's this new sex, and it's so cool. There's not, right? It's just derivatives of the old, okay? If there's one thing you get out of this video, most important thing for those of you who are patient and watched it for the full thing, here's the deal. The price of something, yes, can rise or fall. But remember, it's not ever independent. There are other things to be looking at relative to the price of something. So it's like the price of US stocks relative to the price of Russian stocks. In my opinion, the price of US stocks are expensive, right? It is a relative measure. You're not looking at it independently. Bitcoin is not independent of everything, right? Same thing with gold, same thing with silver, same thing with oil, same thing with markets, okay? Goal is to, in my opinion, to go into a market when there's general bearishness, not bullishness, and to exit when there's general bullishness, because the over-enthusiasm is unbalanced. That's why you sell in a high. It's like the people wanting to crucify Jesus. No. But likewise, the people who want to follow him all the time, dudes, get a life and go fish for yourself. I mean, seriously.